So I'm Ann Skousen. I teach at Chapman University. And for many years, I taught at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York as well, and loved that experience of teaching. My husband and I are the founders of FreedomFest, which is an organization that normally meets in Las Vegas. We usually have about 250 speakers and about 2,000 or more attendees. It's a great event. It's called the World's Greatest Gathering of Free Minds. And this year we'll be meeting in Rapid City, South Dakota, just outside of Mount Rushmore. So we hope you'll consider joining us there for Freedom Fest and all of the great things that we do. I run the film festival there, the Anthem Libertarian Film Festival. It's our 10th anniversary this year. We'll be at the Elks Theater in Rapid City, and I'm really proud of the films that we receive, the libertarian themed films. So that's another great part of Freedom Fest that I do and I really enjoy. So I've been asked today to talk about, and this is on the wrong place, so let me just get back up to where it belongs. You're seeing the title that says The Lure of Democratic Socialism, yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
Great. We were having a little trouble advancing it before, so I just wanted to make sure that it's on the right place. So so that's the topic that I'm going to be talking about tonight. And then my husband is going to talk about the alternative, which is democratic capitalism. But first, I wanted to talk about the lure of democratic socialism. It is on the rise without question. It's up 20% in the past on campuses. It's up 20% just in the past year. The number of students who say that they favor socialism. So it's definitely on the rise. And we need to do something about it. But that means first we have to discover what it is that attracts them to socialism so that we can help to persuade them to find a better alternative. And there's this great quote by Paul in Corinthians, and he says, "When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became an adult, I put away childish things." And what he's saying is that there's a time for childishness or childlikeness, but that time goes by. And I like to point out to my students and others that socialism is a childish thing. It's something that we need to set aside. When we're born, everything is provided for us. It's like magic. When we feel hungry, someone feeds us. When we're cold, someone gives us a blanket and covers us up. When we're dirty, someone washes us. When we're tired, someone puts us into a nice cozy bed, reads us a story, and gives us some milk, which I did just a little while ago with my darling little 2-year-old granddaughter. As we get older, someone takes us to school, gives us an education, plays with us. We naturally begin to think that if there's a problem, someone else is going to fix it. And as a teenager, I thought that someone was the government. I genuinely believed that if there was a problem with the roads, the government would fix it. If we needed a new library, the government would provide it. If we needed medical services, the government could pay for it. I couldn't understand why we needed to be worrying about these kinds of essentials when the government could take care of it for us. And yet, I knew that at home in my family, we had to make choices with our money. We could buy something now, or we could save our money and buy something later, but we couldn't do both. And if we wanted something nice and lasting, we had to do without things in the short run in order to have better, nicer things in the long run. And at one point I thought, well, we should just borrow money. I remember seeing some things that were on sale at a really good price. And I said to my mother, "This is a great price. We ought to stock up on these things while they're on sale." And she said, "Well, we don't have the money right now to do that." And I said, well, then we should just use the credit card because it's such a great price that it's better to buy it at this lower price and just pay it off later when we do have the money. And she very wisely pointed out to me, if we borrow the money now, then in the future, we won't have the money to do other things because we will already have spent it. One of the most important lessons that she ever taught me that should have been self-evident but wasn't when I was a child, because I was understanding things as a child. Well, that's true of households, and it's true of the government as well. when you spend more than you take in, you have to borrow money, and that limits your choices in the future. Our government doesn't quite get that. They think that they can do this magical modern monetary theory and magically money will appear and everything will be wonderful. But we're already seeing the result of modern monetary theory, which is just old-fashioned inflation. If you've been to the store lately, especially the food store, you're seeing prices going up astronomically. Well, not astronomically, but about 25%, consistently 25%. We seem to be experiencing 25% inflation right now. That's a huge amount. We went through this in the 70s where we had double-digit inflation and double-digit interest rates. We bought a house in 1980 that was at a 14.25% interest rate. And I see this happening again for the same reason. We've got this runaway inflation that's being caused by these stimulus packages. You can't just borrow and expect everything to be fine. Unless you're a teenager or unless you're a student who thinks that modern monetary theory will work. So let's look at the lure of democratic socialism. What is it and why is it so attractive? And part of its lure is that students really don't know what it means. Socialism, it just sounds so good. I'm a social person. I have friends. I'm on social media. I have 5,000 followers. I'm a socialist because I'm sociable. But childish and childlike don't mean the same thing. And sociable and socialist don't mean the same thing. There's a great essay I'm going to recommend called Politics in the English Language that was written by George Orwell back in 1946. George Orwell was a great philosopher, and I love reading his works because you can trace his progress philosophically by starting with his very first book, which was Down and Out in Paris and London, where he pretended to be a bum in order to see what the living conditions were like. And his name was actually Eric Blair, and he was a little concerned about publishing this book, concerned about how it would be accepted and what it might do to his family name. So he didn't publish that under his real name, Eric Blair. He published it as George Orwell. And then, of course, it became so well read and so popular and so well respected that everything else he wrote was in the name of George Orwell after that. And as you follow his books, The Road to Wigan Pier and Amish to Catalonia, and Bombay, I want to say Bombay Dreams, but it wasn't that. I can't think of that one. Anyway, you see his progression from socialist to I would call him a libertarian by the end of his life. And for some of the same reasons, he cared about the poor. Who doesn't care about the poor? And he wanted others to have a good life. That's a wonderful reason to be a socialist, if only it worked. But what Orwell says in the politics in English language is that you have to define your terms. You have to define your terms in order to be able to have a true conversation with someone. Because if their definition of a word is different from your definition of the word, you could talk all night and not be saying the same things because your definition is different. I remember learning many years ago, decades ago, that the word for peace in Russia was not the same as the word for peace that we use in English. For us, peace means harmony, not fighting, no war, no violence. But for them, the word peace means peace under communism. There's not a word that doesn't include communism. So if the Russians want peace and we want peace, it sounds like we want the same thing, but we don't. So it's very important that we understand that we are precise in our language, he says, and that we define our terms, especially abstract terms when we're talking. So I highly recommend that you get a copy of this essay. The PDF is available for free online, and I recommend that you get it and share it with your friends, because understanding the definitions of the words that we use is essential to understanding each other. And socialism is one of those words. You've probably seen this meme before, if I can get it to move. There we go. Under communism, you have two cows. The state takes both and gives you some milk. Under socialism, you have two cows. You give one to your neighbor. How nice of you. Under fascism, you have two cows. The state takes both. And I can't read that. So the state takes both and sells you some milk instead of giving it to you. But under traditional capitalism, if you have two cows, you sell one cow, you buy a bull, the herd multiplies, the economy grows, you sell them, and you retire on the income. So I kind of like that definition of capitalism, traditional capitalism. Now, socialism, does anyone have a problem with the definition of socialism here? You have two cows, you give one to your neighbor. How nice. Do you agree with that as a definition of socialism? Is that what socialism is like in your experience, that you have more of something than you need and so you give some of it to somebody else? I actually wouldn't mind that because it would imply that I have a choice in the matter. But really, socialism is more like this. You have two cows, the government takes one and gives it to your neighbor. It has nothing to do with what you want to do. And so I think it's important for us to understand the true, our definitions. Still, socialism is very attractive because it does feel like you're sharing and giving to others. I was talking to some friends today who were talking about gardening and how important it is and helping the poor. And one of them was saying that she had gone to a place where homeless people hang out. And she said, would you like to come and work in my garden? And I'll share some of the produce with you. And eventually she expects them to come back repeatedly. And for now, she would give them just some produce from her refrigerator. But she was really proud of the fact that she was encouraging people to come to her neighborhood and work in her garden. She couldn't understand why her neighbors were not happy about that. And I said, well, you know, maybe they're remembering what happened when Elizabeth Smart's parents brought a homeless man home to work on their roof. He came back and kidnapped their daughter. So, so you have to kind of keep track of things like that. Still, we are very concerned about people having adequate food, adequate shelter, adequate education, a good job. We want people to have these things. As libertarians, we want people to have these things. We want people to be self-sufficient, self-reliant. We don't want to have to give them milk from our cow. We want them to be able to afford their own cow and produce their own milk. I think that's a much better goal than simply giving stuff to people because they don't have it. So we all see the same problems. Where we differ is in the solutions to those problems. And there's this quote by Marx. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to tell you that, but here's this quote. My husband likes to do this in his economic classes, where he gives them just this quotation: from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. So what do you think of that as a quotation? Does that sound like a good thing to do? From each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. You do what you can and you receive what you require. In our church, we certainly do things that way. We serve to the best of our ability, and if we need something, it's given to us. If we, go and say, I have this need, and we help each other voluntarily. Who knows who this quote is from? Who said this? Who wrote this? From each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs.
Marx.
Yeah, it's Marx. But students really like this. And so my husband will go on from there and say, okay, so what are your needs? You're going to be graduating soon. You're going to be getting a job. What is your need? How much do you need in order to provide a decent living for yourself and for your family? And they hem-haw around a little bit. And they usually come up with about $70,000, that they need $70,000. And he'll say, so do you think $70,000 will cover your needs for rent, insurance, transportation, food, clothing, all of those kinds of things, and a little bit left over for some entertainment. Would $70,000 do it? Yes, $70,000 would. So you don't need more than $70,000. No, I don't need more than $70,000. So then he'll go on and talk about the implications of this. For example, what happens if you make more than $70,000? Well, that will be given to the poor. What if you make less than $70,000? Well, you'll have that made up for you by the people who make more than $70,000. So what does that amount to? It means that above $70,000, you're paying taxes at a 100% marginal rate. That's outrageous. Even under Roosevelt, it was only a 98% marginal tax rate. And the Beatles sing about, they have a 90% marginal tax rate on their income in Taxman. But you can see you can see where this is heading. As the students start to contemplate, what would you do then once you get to $70,000? Are you going to work overtime? Are you maybe going to take a vacation? And they start thinking, well, there's really no advantage to working after I make $70,000. And you go to the other person who makes less than $70,000, who has maybe a physically more demanding job or less interesting job. So how hard are you going to work at that dead-end job that you don't really like? Well, maybe I don't have to work at all because I'm going to get that $70,000 whether I work or not. And so you can see what happens when you start explaining it this way and thinking about human nature. It really takes a strong personality to be willing to work for nothing. And that's really what 100% marginal tax rate is. You're getting nothing for your work. And so it really works for a very short time. And in fact, the golden goose only lasts one generation. If we taxed all the billionaires in the world right now at 100% rate, it's going to be gone and there's not going to be any money left. And that's what these students don't understand, is that it only works for one generation and then it's all going to be gone. I love this quote from Winston Churchill, where he says, any man who is under 30 and is not a liberal has no heart, and any man who is over 30 and is not a conservative has no brain. What does he mean by that? Does anyone want to comment on that quote? Any man who is under 30 and is not a liberal has not a heart, and any man who is over 30 and is not a conservative has no brain. What do you think? Any comments? Oh, I see we have a couple of chats here. Let me see what you're saying. Marx and Kramer and Seinfeld. That's true. Rachel, it's there as well. I can see you're a Seinfeld fan. So what he's saying is, when we're young, we have such empathy, and that's a childlike characteristic. That's a good characteristic, to have empathy for other people. I remember one time taking my grandchildren. We were on a little excursion and we were out in public, and as we were crossing the street, little Miles saw a man who was on the street corner with a sign saying, hungry, need food. We see that sign all the time. Yeah, right, you're hungry. You probably have a Mercedes down the street and you changed your clothes to come up. We get so cynical about the homeless as we age. But little Miles saw the man's look on his face, and he saw the man's sign saying that he was hungry, and Miles' little heart just went out to him. And he said, Nana, can we give him some money so he can have some food? So of course I did. I didn't want to ruin that sweet, kind generosity that was naturally percolating inside him. As we get older, though, we do start to become a little more realistic, and we realize that just giving people stuff doesn't really help them. It feeds them temporarily, or gives them some drug money if that's what they want to do with it, but it doesn't help them become productive and self-reliant. So that's really what Churchill meant by this. We need to be liberal in the classical sense, liberal in our concern for others, but conservative in our solutions, because those tend to be more lasting to be more efficient and long-term oriented. I like this one too. He says the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. I've always loved that quote. And by the way, he did not have the in front of blessings or the in front of misery. The meme just added those in. We're so worried right now about inequality. Inequality is just the worst thing that people can think of, but inequality is temporary. We have so much mobility, especially in the United States, where we don't have a caste system that keeps people in certain castes or certain social standings, but we are very mobile, and money is the way we do it. Money allows us to move from one place to another, and entrepreneurship is the most efficient way to move from one socioeconomic level to another. The only way we can all be equal is if we push everyone down to the same point, rather than incentivizing people to work and rise above that. So if we really want equality, what we're saying is we want everybody to be equally miserable. And I don't think that's truly what we want. It's just what ends up happening. So the other thing about equality is that if everyone is exactly equal, we become completely stagnant. We can't move, we can't buy, we can't trade if everything is equal. I think about the people that I hired to help me with around my home, with our pool, with our landscaping, with cleaning and those kinds of things. If we all earned exactly the same amount of money, I wouldn't be able to afford to have them come to my home and work. So it's very stagnating. But the thing to remember is that there's a dynamism to inequality, that we're always moving, making more. We don't stay in the $15 an hour job for the rest of our lives. It's a temporary stepping stone to better skills and better pay. So we need that mobility that comes from that. That terrible vice of capitalism that gives us the unequal sharing of blessings. It may be unequal, but it's blessings nonetheless. Okay, so I prefer when we're in a real room and I can see people's faces and they can talk and I can talk and we can have some interaction. But it's nice to be able to be with you from Florida tonight when I'm not in California. So what we have discovered is that equality takes away incentives. Equality reduces overall production. Equality leads us to go further and further down. And it's what we end up seeing very quickly in countries like Venezuela, Hong Kong, Cuba. When you think that Venezuela was the wealthiest country in South America 20 years ago, has the most oil reserves of any country in South America, and is now at a place where people are trying to escape. And if they can't, they've eaten all the zoo animals. Now they're eating their pets. They're starving, and it's a terrible thing to see. In Hong Kong, where the protests were going on, Hong Kong was the wealthiest and freest country, tiny little country, when it had freedom. But now that it has been absorbed by communist China, the quality of living has just plummeted. We were there a couple of years ago, and it was just so sad to see how different it was from when we used to go there in the 80s and the 90s, even into the 2000s. But now it's just so sad to see. And of course the freedom is gone. Protesters have been arrested and sent to China and may never get out. It's a terrible thing to see. And that's really the result of socialism that our students don't see when they're thinking about how good they want to be, how virtuous they want to be as they care about people. They don't understand the better way to provide for them. And privately, wherever dictatorships and socialism take over, the people resort to barter because it's really the only way. They instinctively realize that trade is the only way that they can get ahead and that they can survive, trading their surplus. And many times they bypass the monetary system and just barter. What a clumsy way of running an economy. So capitalism, as you know, has become a dirty word. And going back to George Orwell, we probably need to be looking at new alternatives, because what some people think about capitalism isn't what we think about capitalism. And if other people have a negative feeling about it, then we're not going to be able to have the right communication. So we might be looking for new ways to define capitalism, or even new labels for it. Perhaps something like entrepreneurship, which people do understand, monetization, business, trade, free markets, those kinds of ideas. Even without the hyphenated, John Mackey came up with the idea, with the title of conscious capitalism, which is capitalism with a heart. We've identified crony capitalism, which is not really capitalism; it's crony corporatism. So we've had to redefine our terms as these words start to have negative connotations or positive connotations for other things. And so we have to be careful of that and make sure that we use the right terms and are able to communicate what it is we really mean and not just rely on labels. Going back to George Orwell, his final book was called Animal Farm, written in 1948. And it's a parody of the Russians as they took over Europe. And of course, the animals rise up, they kick out the Russians, and they start living in the farmhouse and running their own farm, but they become just as bad as the communists and socialists that they had kicked out. Well, there's this one animal named Molly, and she's a horse, and she's a big, beautiful, strong horse, and she works harder than any of the other animals. She's big enough to plow the field and to pull the big heavy logs when they need to build barns and so forth. And she can take them into town, and she can haul things back. She's just their strongest, best worker. And they go into the house one time, and they're all kind of looking around at this bourgeoisie house, and Molly goes into a bedroom, and she sees these ribbons, and she loves the ribbons. She wants to wear these ribbons in her mane and in her tail. You can see that in this picture here. And Snowball, the head pig, says, no, we don't have enough ribbons for everybody to have ribbons, so you can't have ribbons. If there's not enough for everybody, then nobody can have them. And he throws them in the fire and gets rid of them. And Molly is so upset and sad that she leaves the farm. She runs away. And so they lose all of her benefit, all of her strength, all that she had been contributing to this community. She'd been contributing more than anyone else. And all she wanted was some ribbons. All she wanted was a reward, an incentive for doing the hard work that she was doing. But without it, she said, forget it, I'm out of here. And she leaves the community. I think it's important for us to realize that we work better with incentives than with a lash. We want to work, we want to be rewarded for our efforts. And if some people are rewarded with more than others, it's okay. It's okay. We can all get the things that we need, even if they aren't the same things. It's like at Christmas time. I don't buy my children matching blue bicycles because they don't all want bicycles. I get them what they need and what they want, not what everybody else wants. I just don't think equality in that sense is the right thing. Here's what we really need is, going down here to the Bill of Rights, but now I've lost it. Sorry. Anyway, we need a foundation, the Bill of Rights to. There we go. Back. We need the Bill of Rights to vouchsafe the things that can't be changed. and then we can, and that's the equality that we need. Equality under the law, equality of opportunity, but not being identical. So this is a quote from John F. DeLeo, and he said he was talking about climate change and cleaning up the environment, which is another good that we all want to have. We don't want to live in polluted environments. And he says, only with great wealth can low-lying coastal cities rebuild their piers and breakwaters. Only with great wealth can distribution networks be changed to account for movement in agricultural production. Only with great wealth can communities be moved from newly inhospitable areas to hospitable ones. Only with great wealth can people who can't afford air conditioning buy air conditioning. Whether big or small, the many problems that changes in weather trends may cause are handled best by capitalism. By contrast, all socialism can do is exacerbate problems. In this, yes, in all things, big government is the problem, not the solution. And I completely agree with him on that. You need capital, you need money, you need savings in order to build factories that can be clean. America has done the best of all the countries in cleaning up our environment. The pollution was much, much worse in Southern California when I was a little girl growing up there. We could barely, it was brown all the time. You could feel it in your throat and you could barely see the mountains, which now we can, sometimes it's hazy, but for the most part, we can, the air is so much cleaner because we had the capital to do that. So capital is a good thing. It makes our lives better. Now, what about the democratic part of democratic socialism? Is it good to live in a democracy where the majority rules? Well, yes and no. It's a good thing if all of us are foxes and we're trying to decide what's for dinner. But it's a bad thing if we are 3 foxes and a chicken voting on who's going to be dinner. So the problem with democracy is that sometimes the majority will trample on the rights of the minority, will force them to do things that they don't want to do, or will take away from them things that they want to keep, that they've worked for. Let's not let democracy become 2 foxes and a chicken deciding what's for dinner. And that's why it is so essential that we have the Bill of Rights, because this is our framework that vouchsafes our individual rights to free speech, free assembly. To me, those are the 2 most important ones. Yes, the right to keep and bear arms, and the right to a speedy trial, and the right to keep our property. The most important ones, I think, are free speech and free assembly, because with those, we can change bad laws. Without those, we cannot even discuss bad laws. And that's what they're finding in Hong Kong right now. So getting back to where we started, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became an adult, I put away childish things. Let's put away socialism, which is a childish thing, and replace it with responsibility, self-reliance, helping others by helping them help themselves, saving money rather than borrowing money so that we have the capital with which to build our economy. And if we can do that, I think we can stem the tide of this rising attraction to socialism. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to my husband, who's going to talk about the better idea to replace democratic socialism. And so, Mark, I'm going to let you take it away.
So I'm going to comment on some of the things that you said, Joanne.
Okay.
And then just give a few examples of democratic capitalism. Let me just first say that the socialists have changed. They have learned a little bit. The socialists today do not advocate nationalization of all the industries and the hotels and the airports and the all the different steel industry and stuff like that. They realize that government is inefficient and they have to rely on private enterprise and the incentives of the private enterprise system. What they advocate is high progressive taxation so that they can transfer wealth from rich to poor, high regulations, distrust of entrepreneurs and capitalists and Wall Street. So it's a combination of regulation. It's almost a fascist type of philosophy of controlling behavior when it comes to money making, rather than actually trying to get everyone to live in a collective. So that's generally the attitude. When you look at Bernie Sanders and these other socialists, they're socialists with a small s, not a big S like in the past. I liked what Joanne said about we're all seeking the same goals. We care about poverty. We care about social justice. We care about pollution. We want to live in a society without those without the problems associated with our society, but we have different solutions. My thinking is that we're all unit. We should focus on a unity, what our goals are, and demonstrate if we can educate people. I think it's all about education. Milton Friedman, the free market economist, always said this. He said, 90% of people will agree with the solutions if they all knew the facts and they understood the theory. They took a class in free market economics. And I've seen this over and over again when I teach my classes. I start off by quoting what Joanne quoted on here about from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And I can get 50%, sometimes 80 or 90% of people saying, yeah, that makes sense. That's the ideal society. I was giving a lecture at Hillsdale College, which is full of conservative students, right? And I got over half of them to agree with the Marx statement, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So it's very attractive, the lure of socialism, as Joanne calls it. And then we put our economic hat on and realize it's a marginal tax rate of 100%. And there's no incentive, even when you earn less than 70,000, to earn more. So it's all about incentives. And once you explain that to students, they get it. And they realize that they need incentives. So I use the Jack London quote. So the Jack London, who was a socialist with a small s, he said, well, obviously regular socialism doesn't work. So we got to change the quote. So the quote is, here's the quote from Jack London: from each according to his ability to each according to his deeds. Instead of needs, you change it to deeds. And guess what? That's capitalism. You now have the right incentives. So another thing that I wanted to mention that Joanne talked about the difference between socialism and capitalism. So because of their proper incentives, capitalism is all about sharing the wealth. Socialism is sharing the poverty because they don't have the incentives. They're always pleading poverty. Whenever you meet socialists, they're always pleading poverty. So we want to provide, let's go back to this idea, all have the same goals. So equality is one that everybody kind of likes. We all want to be equal. So we emphasize the equality of opportunity. We want to give everybody a decent college education or basic education. It doesn't necessarily have to mean going to college, but I think everybody would agree you want to have a system where everyone gets educated, so everyone can read. You want to be able to read. Literacy is an extremely important goal for everybody. So we all agree with that. But again, we have to show what is the best solution to literacy, to a good education, and so forth. And we find that school choice is really a good example because it incentivizes teachers to make sure they do a good job. We believe in equality of opportunity, and everybody can agree with that. What we don't believe in is equality of results, because if you have equality of results, then you don't accomplish you don't have the incentives, right? Because everybody has the same result. So again, students, when they're confronted with this, they tend to get on your side. Joanne mentioned Venezuela. I have to tell you a funny story. So I'm updating my book, The Making of Modern Economics, which is the history of the great economic thinkers. So I have to update my final chapter, which is saying what is the latest thing that is going on among economists and economic policy issues and so forth. So I have this section on the rise of socialism. And there's a book that came out, which is a collection, a survey, if you will, of what's happening with socialism around the world. So they have a chapter on Cuba. They got a chapter on Argentina. They got a chapter on Chile and so forth. But I found it ironic. I said, where's your chapter on Venezuela? Why don't you have a chapter on Venezuela? This is an academic book talking about the survey of socialism, and they didn't have a chapter on Venezuela. And I thought that was really ironic because they do say they're socialists. Now, you can disagree with them saying, well, they're very authoritarian. That's not the, I believe in democratic socialism, and this is not democratic. You could make that argument, but at least you got to have a chapter and confront and discuss that. And they didn't. And when I brought it up, they gave no response. They said, well, our revised version is going to have a chapter on Bolivia. Still no chapter on Venezuela. Finally, democracy. I am actually a big fan of democracy, and I know libertarians are often opposed to democracy. A lot of them have, I have a lot of my friends who don't even believe in voting. Doug Casey, who comes to FreedomFest every year. I had a debate one time at FreedomFest on should we vote? And you have a number of people who said, yeah, it just encourages the bastards. It's a corrupt system, so why be a part of it, and so forth. But I actually think democracy, especially referendums, we have referendums in California, referendums in Florida, and so on. They're always passing some kind of crazy legislation. And so I look at that and I say, this is really valuable information. The fact that 30 states have all had a referendum that passed a $15 minimum wage law, that tells you how much work we have cut out for us. That just shows you that how ignorant and how stupid people are. And we need to know that. And unfortunately, when you suppress the votes and you counter what the people want, you lose that insight as to how much work we need and why we need good candidates, good political leaders, good teachers, good institutions that can teach us these things. One of the things that the Marxists are really good at, you look at Anthony Scaramucci. I mean, not Anthony Scaramucci, Antonio, sorry, that was Gramsci, who, and also who's the guy from Chicago that the Marxists that advocated taking over, what influenced Obama? What was his name? Alinsky, right? Alinsky.
Oh, was he from Chicago?
Yeah, Alinsky. So all of them have these strategies to take over our institutions, and they do it deliberately. This is a conspiracy if you've ever had one. I've seen Marxists take over whole departments in campuses, and it's deliberate. They get one guy in there, then they encourage them to get another one in there, and before long, they have taken over the entire department. University of Massachusetts at Amherst is a good example. University of Utah is another example. I mean, a bastion of Mormon conservatism, and the economics department, the U of U, is Marxist. How did that happen? Well, it wasn't by accident. It was deliberate. And we don't do that. We're a herd of cats. This is one reason we've created FreedomFest, is because we want to bring people together. And I can't tell you how difficult this has been. They just don't get it. Libertarians don't get it. Conservatives don't get it. The freedom movement, they don't get it. I mean, they kind of get it, but it's an uphill battle to figure out that we need to come together. We either hang separately, we either all hang together or we hang separately, as Ben Franklin said. So the final thing I want to say is that you can't get rid of a bad idea by just criticizing. That doesn't work. And all these guys that are up there and writing their articles and they're complaining about, quote, the left and the far left, and they're doing this and they're doing that. We can criticize till we're blue in the face, but unless you provide an alternative to bad ideas, you're never going to get rid of bad ideas. And I've done this over and over again. So how do you get rid of the $15 minimum wage idea? Well, you have to provide an alternative. And what is the alternative? Capitalism has an alternative. Why have wages increased dramatically, including minimum wages, without any fallback to the government imposing a minimum wage? The average wage is substantially above the minimum wage, but it was $2 a day working in 1914 when Henry Ford made a dramatic decision with his board. And he said, listen, we've made $30 million. How should we distribute the money? Should we keep it all as retained earnings and expand our firms? The whole board agreed to that. Should we pay a dividend? We've never paid a dividend. The board agreed to that. Should we give our workers a raise? Oh, no, we don't want to do that. We're not going to share the wealth. And Henry Ford objected. He said, yes, we are. And he announced to the world overnight, he was going from $2 a day to $5 a day. And in one fell swoop, he destroyed the two biggest arguments against the Marxists who complained that capitalism, number one, exploited workers because they didn't share the wealth, and two, alienated the workers because workers couldn't earn enough money to buy the product they were producing all day long. None of them could afford a Model T that was $500 a car. But at $5 a day, from $2 a day to $5 a day, guess what? Not only did he share the wealth, but he gave the workers enough money to buy their automobiles, to buy the cars they were producing. So this is why Marxism has really never made much of an inroad in American business life, because you had an enlightened capitalist who believed in democratic capitalism. And when you and it's all about profit sharing, it's stock options, it's giving raises to workers who improve the productivity of the company. I tell all my students at Chapman University, I said, don't ever forget this one important lesson you're going to learn in this class. When you go out to look for a job after you've graduated, the companies that pay that have a higher profit margin pay their workers more. Let me repeat that. Companies that have higher profit margins pay their workers more because they can afford it. So when Whole Foods pays the average worker $18 an hour, that's because they have the highest profit margins in the grocery business. And companies cannot pay higher wages unless they're earning more profits. So we need to encourage more profits in corporations through corporate tax cuts, through deregulation, the kind of things that Trump actually did, the good things that Trump actually did, which is now being reversed by the Biden administration. So there's a lot of great things you can do. So you replace democratic socialism with democratic capitalism. And I guarantee you that no student is going to complain if they're all getting part of the wealth. Equality means nothing to them if they're getting benefits from stock options. I mean, you have to remember that Microsoft, Bill Gates is a classic example. Bill Gates decided to give every employee stock options. You know how many employees at Microsoft have become multimillionaires? 12,000. And we're not talking about executives. We're talking about secretaries. We're talking about people, janitors. I mean, they all got stock options. That's democratic capitalism. And when you do that, everyone becomes a capitalist. That's my message.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us this talk. It's amazing. Speaking of capitalism and free markets, I just want to point out the miracle of modern technology that we're all on right now, Zoom, allowing us to span the entire country, 3 time zones, and still get together and do this meetup and have this great conversation. So let's applaud capitalism for that. So I guess it's the time for Q&A. There is a lot of information that we got here this evening. Thank you for that. And we have to have a lot of really great questions that are on people's minds. So if anybody wants to jump in and ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and go.
Or you can use the chat too, for that matter. So either one, chat or speak out.
Nobody, or we have a group of shy libertarians this evening? Well, I have a question. Can you do a little bit more? I know you gave a couple of examples, which were great, but can you give a little bit more of a background, I guess compare contrast between what you would consider standard, conventional, I guess, orthodox capitalism versus democratic capitalism, Mark?
Yeah, the standard capitalist model is that it's all about profits. It's a stakeholder, it's what we call a shareholder philosophy, and that is there's a pecking order, and the people that matter the most are the executives, who have incredible power, the power to hire and fire you at any time. There's no rights. Workers have no rights. Workers strike. It's the Andrew Carnegie model. The Andrew Carnegie model was either my way or the highway. He finally gave in to the workers at the home stake in Pittsburgh, where they're the steel firm, and gave them reduced their work hours from 10 hours a day to 8 hours a day. Didn't give them a raise, but at least reduced the hours so that they could spend more time at home. And the workers were delighted with this. And then Andrew Carnegie reversed himself and said, no, we're going to go back to 10 hours. We have we're falling back on production, and we're going back to 10 hours. You can imagine the workers struck. They had a big strike. And Andrew Carnegie brought in, Frick, I guess was his partner, and said, bring in the Pinkertons, and let's end this strike right away. And there was a severe violent several people were killed and so on. And meanwhile, Andrew Carnegie, to make sure he washed his hands of it, went back to Scotland at the time and said he didn't know anything about it. I mean, that's the traditional robber baron kind of perspective. The new, and you have to remember that there were no MBA programs back then. This was all new stuff in the Industrial Revolution, where you had Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan and those people. It was all about capitalists only. And so you had the rise of Marxism and unionism at that time because they didn't have a balanced approach, what we call a stakeholder approach. And the stakeholder approach is the new approach that gradually developed after Henry Ford. Henry Ford was the revolutionary here in developing the stakeholder philosophy, where you have a win-win situation. And then you got it advanced to John Mackey with his Whole Foods strategy of conscious capitalism. He's speaking on this. By the way, we're having a big debate between Yaron Brook and John Mackey at FreedomFest this year that you won't want to miss, because Yaron Brook and Ayn Rand and so forth, I know we have big fans of Ayn Rand and stuff. Theirs is the more traditional approach, that it's all about the profits and focusing on the investors rather than the workers and the suppliers and the consumers and all of that, which is really important. And Mackey has a revolutionary new approach of conscious capitalism. He is co-ambassador to FreedomFest. But we like to have these debates, and this will be a wonderful civil debate between the two on the philosophy of profits and looking beyond profits. So that's really the difference between the two models. It's a very big difference.
It's funny you mentioned Ayn Rand in that. I know that she didn't care much for libertarians because she felt that they lacked morality in their convictions. So that was so when you talk to her, when you're talking about her in terms of lacking some level of morality potentially on the side of capitalism as defined by many people, including Marx, that is the kind of robber baron element of that. Not so sure I necessarily agree with that. I guess there's, because like socialism, there's so many different understandings, let's say, of what capitalism is, and I don't, from a lot of people I read and talk to, it's less of an ism than it is just an economic concept that considers capital as being a necessary part of the ingredients in the overall economic understanding. But anyway, besides that, I guess it is interesting because it does challenge a lot of the stuff that you're saying. Does kind of challenge what a lot of other people are currently discussing and talking about as well. But it definitely has. I mean, you make the great point of you can't just kind of poo-poo the idea of socialism because of its failures without kind of giving an alternative, because you're not going to talk anybody into anything. You're not going to talk somebody out of something. You can talk them into something that's better though. And I think that is really what it kind of comes down to.
Yeah, good point.
So
Provide them with a better idea.
yeah, I mean, well, that's the whole point of all of this, I think, and what libertarians often talk about. Well, everybody really that's not on the left talking about how things these days are so geared toward shutting people down and shutting people up. Getting rid of free speech and not allowing it to be on social media. Canceling people, the whole cancel culture element. It's like it's almost like an admission that their ideas are so bad that they can't be around or hear any other ideas. So they must cancel everything out so that those ideas can't compete with their ideas. And essentially, that's what we're doing if we're not giving alternatives. We're just sort of trying to cancel them out with our smaller voices. But anyway, so thank you so much. Does anybody have any other questions or comments or anything that they want to add to this?
I do. I was just wondering what your thoughts were with regards to advancing this frame of democratic capitalism, as I think I understand it from the way you've described it. It sort of sounds like there needs to be two fronts in terms of convincing the general public or the would-be left-wing thinking people to see capitalism in this way. But also there's another front that you seem to be describing in terms of describing the business owners and the would-be capitalists to view their view more in terms of this way than in terms of the way it had been in the past. So I was just curious what your thoughts are. Do you think that one front is more important than the other at this point, or is this like an equal? Anyway, that's my question.
I think
I don't mean to interrupt either,
Okay.
but I want to tack on an additional, because that's almost exactly what I had a question very, very, very similar. So I just kind of want to expand it as well. It seems to me that we're arguing, the argument is pro-business, and a lot of businesses, corporate America doesn't seem to be on board. How are we going to be able to make headway for businesses that don't seem to want it? And then kind of a follow-up question with that is, do you think that businesses, corporate, the boards and these executives, do you think they believe it? Do you think they believe the philosophy? How can a business that runs on profit possibly sustain itself on the wokeism, if you will? So I didn't mean to interrupt, Aaron, either. I'm sorry about that, but
No,
it's like right in there.
No, you're right, Matt. I think those questions are very much connected. So thanks for jumping in. I think that was right. Mark will probably have an additional answer, but to both of you, I do think it's a two-pronged approach. You're right, Aaron, and Matt. There is more to it than traditional business. We have to persuade this younger generation by explaining to them the natural outcome of socialist policies, because they sound so good at the beginning. Free education, free healthcare, free gas, free food. They're just so, they believe they can get all this stuff for free. They believe that there's enough money somewhere in the government just by taxing the rich to get it. So we have to help them, first of all, to see the numbers. There isn't enough money out there in private wallets to do all the things that government does. So they have to look at the numbers. They have to see the numbers more clearly. Another thing they need to see is what happens down the line. And just as Mark gives these examples of what if everybody gets $70,000 a year? What's going to be the natural consequence of that? And to see how that doesn't work. I in one of my classes at Chapman is about mythology and folklore. And when I tell my students the story of the ant and the grasshopper and the little red hen, they're with me all the way until it gets to the point of, you can't have what I have, and they can't bring themselves to accept that. You know the story of the ant and the grasshopper. The ant works and works all summer and stores food and stores goods. And so over the winter, he'll have enough to eat, he and his community. The grasshopper does nothing except play all summer. And in the winter, when he's starving, he knocks on the door of the anthill and says, please, I'm starving. Can I have some food? And the ant says, sorry, you played all summer. You don't deserve anything. And in the old days, that was acceptable. But with modern students, they cannot bring themselves to make that leap to, you get what you worked for and you don't get what you didn't work for. They just can't accept that. What we need to do is to show them that the longer term goal is to make everybody productive, everybody self-reliant, so that they don't have to go begging at the door in the middle of winter, because they will have taken care of themselves. Because there is another alternative, and that is to train the grasshopper to work. So we have to change their perception of socialism to see that giving things away is not the best way to help people have happy, productive lives. We used to say, you know, give a man a fish and he eats for one day, teach him to fish and he eats forever. That somehow has gone out of favor. We need to go back to being able to teach that. The other thing is they all participate in capitalism. They're all doing blogs. They're all selling on Etsy and eBay, and they all have these very creative kinds of things that they're doing, and they're making money at it by monetizing their number of views. And so they are capitalists. They just don't know that that's what they are. So if we need to change the name to entrepreneurship or monetization or something, let's go ahead and change the name. We don't have to call it capitalism, but we need to help them see that what they're doing is a form of capitalism, that it is simply saving money now, providing a good for somebody else that they want, and exchanging it for money. That when we have free exchange, everybody life is improved, because you want what I have and I want what you have, and both of us are better off. Those simple kinds of concepts that seem so common sense to us, we need to be teaching those in ways that don't feel like teaching. We need to be persuading them of these simple truths.
Well, I'll make one more point and then I have to go, because I have an 8 a.m. speech tomorrow morning here in California. I mean, here in Florida. So I'm going to have to go after this. But one of the extremely important principles is the third party problem. And it applies to education. It applies to healthcare. There's a lot of issues where if somebody else is paying, you lose control. Your product declines in value. Fraud becomes a serious problem. And that happens in education. When someone else is paying your education, you don't get as good an education. You don't have the incentives to graduate on time, to get better grades, and so forth. There's lots of studies on this. When you actually pay for your own education, it makes a difference. Same thing with the healthcare. We have a great solution. It's universal healthcare sounds really good until you put your economics cap on and analyze it and realize how it creates shortages. Anytime you give something that's a valuable commodity like healthcare or education, you give it to people for free, you have the third party problem, and you develop into inferior product development. But what's really cool is you have alternative answers. In healthcare, you have Singapore MediSave program, which is based on health savings accounts, and it's universal. It's very successful. Only 5% of Singapore's GDP is devoted to healthcare compared to our 18% in the United States. They live longer lives than we do. On almost every metric, they outperform us. So once again, you're not going to get rid of a bad idea called universal healthcare, socialized medicine, the Canadian model or whatever it is, until you provide an alternative. And Singapore provides the alternative. Sean Flynn, the professor of economics, has written a wonderful book, The Cure That Works, how to get first-class healthcare at a quarter of the price. It's a great book. So we just need to expand education and have more people out there preaching this stuff. That's what we need to do, instead of constantly complaining and divisive labeling. I notice you're all using the term the left and stuff like that. We got to stop that.
We didn't say that.
Yeah, and they're not a uniform group. You talk about the cancel culture. There are lots of people who are social democrats who are very, if you're familiar with FIRE, for example, they fight this thing all the time. They're not all a group. You can't group all these people calling them leftists. We've got to change our terminology. But anyway, enough enough of that. I've got to run, but there's a lot of good things that we can really do to advance liberty in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. And Joanne, thank you very much. Both of you have been so gracious with your time and just great things in general. Now, I know that you have to run, Mark, but Joanne, if you wouldn't mind, I think you wanted to give us some information about FreedomFest and just kind of let us know what's going on. And if anybody wants to kind of reach out to you guys, how they might be able to find you as well.
You sure you don't want to stick around for that, Mark?
No, I mean, I've been exhausted. I'm exhausted. I've wiped, I've been busy all day speaking and stuff. Okay. See y'all later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark. Bye.
All right. So Freedom Fest, as I mentioned, it's been, we've been doing it for almost 20 years now, and 250 speakers, 2,500 attendees. We're meeting in South Dakota this year near Mount Rushmore. For information, you can go to www.freedomfest.com and get all of your information. We have people like Dr. Drew and JP Sears and Hershey Ali and Dave Rubin is coming this year. Governor Kristi Noem is going to be speaking, John Mackey. And then I run the film festival. We're doing that we're doing the 10th anniversary of that this year. We have debates on immigration, Bitcoin, climate change, the pandemic lockdown, speeches about technology, history, art, science. We have a big debate showcase with teenage debaters from around the world. We have an entrepreneurial pitch tank. An exhibit hall with 100 exhibitors showing all kinds of wares, think tanks, business investments. So it's a big deal. We have parties, we have comedy shows at night, we have karaoke at night, we have hospitality events and a huge banquet on Saturday night with a performance by Brule, this really terrific Native American music and dance group. And best of all, you meet people who have the same concerns that you do, who consider the same solutions that you do. You make wonderful friendships at Freedom Fest. So it's a great opportunity. Our early bird rate ends on March 31st. So if you're interested, go to freedomfest.com, take a look, and then sign up before March 31st so you can take advantage of the $100 off special that we're doing until then. And we hope to see you there.
Thank you so much, Joanne. You will definitely see Tracy and I there. And I guess thank you guys so much for being here. I hope that you enjoy this talk. I think we're getting more comfortable. I think we're getting a bigger group going every month. And I think that, we've got some of the best speakers you can possibly ever want. So I really appreciate you coming on again. And I look forward to seeing you at Freedom Fest.
Thanks for having us.